deeper from just like my values integrity, but going deeper into like actual behaviors that you can lean into within that value to work through conflict. So very much how to use your values to move through conflict. So as we move you into breakout rooms, we encourage you to, of course, introduce who you are, say what you do, or however you want to introduce yourself. And then for the conversation, answer the question of what is a value that you've leaned into or discovered during this pandemic? I was hesitant to ask this question at first because I'm always like, screw this, I'm over talking about a pandemic, but it is very much a challenge right in our face. And I think if we can acknowledge some of our values that we're leaning on within this challenging moment, it allows us to remind ourselves of what values we've used when we see a conflict in the future. So that's the question we're going to dive into when we break you guys out. Maud has the controls for that, so I'll let you go for it.
Fantastic. Do you want to repeat that question one more time so it's in everyone's mind, and then I'll send everybody out?
Yep. What is a value that you've leaned into or discovered during this pandemic?
Fantastic. So I'm going to send some folks.
Rachel, I think you have to click the...
Oh, sorry, I didn't see that.
No, you're good. I was just watching, like, she doesn't see that. Cool. We'll stay in here in case anybody jumps on.
Fantastic. Oh, sorry, I got all...
I literally almost called you at like 8:30 this morning because I was thinking about it. It's like, she's not going to be awake. I'm sure it got sent out. And I was like, wait, do we need to send out a reminder email? And I was like, oh no, it's all automatic. We did that.
For the other one, but I didn't do it. Darn it. What was I gonna say? Oh, yeah, I was just happily away creating my little document for the whiteboard, and
Oh well, hopefully, I'm sure we lost a few people due to that, but that's okay.
Yeah.
Figure it out. We'll still be good.
Yeah. Fantastic. Did you want to go pop into any of the rooms, or?
I haven't gone to the bathroom since I started my last training at like 10, so I'm gonna go pee really fast.
Do it.
Because this is my moment. I'll be right back.
Moment. All right, we'll talk to you in a second.
Okay. Okay.
About halfway through. Give everybody a few more moments.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I'm gonna
And chill here.
yeah. It's the really boring part of the recording. It's just Maud and
Just us.
It's riveting.
Mm-hmm. That's okay.
That's the part that gets edited out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I'd love to be able to send out the recording like as soon as possible to folks. How quick do you think your team could edit?
So I'm recording, it'll be on my computer. I don't know. When we have our meeting at with
1:30.
Hunter, let's check in with him because he may have a better answer and understand like kind of like the workload from my team and stuff like that.
Yeah. And I can try to figure out how to edit. I've never played with it, but I think I could figure it out. Because I
Yeah.
think the recordings are helpful. Definitely with our technical difficulties, it'd be great to get a recording like as soon as possible to folks.
Yeah, absolutely.
Make sure we don't lose them for next week.
Mm-hmm. And I'll try on my end too. Let's see here. I'm gonna send everybody. You ready for everyone to come back?
Mm-hmm. Cool. Oh, that's you.
I'm gonna remind folks to turn it into gallery view when we're having conversation.
Perfect.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Oh, that was weird. We're back.
Welcome back, everyone.
Hey, I think it automatically mutes us when we come back.
Oh, I think it does because we have auto mute on.
Mm-hmm.
Feel free to unmute yourself if you have something you have to say.
Please do. Please do. Fantastic. Well, how'd that go for everybody? Did anybody have some obviously introduced everybody, but anyone have some kind of thoughts they wanted to share from their breakout rooms?
Sure. So Sophie and I talked about how it's been really great for us to develop new ways to communicate with prospects and communicate with just people. And one of the things that I talked about was finding and exploring new ways to build our brand and build our business as, or picking kind of the trusted advisor role that we want to play with our clients and prospects and really building on that. And then one of the other pieces we talked about was how to keep those messages genuine and not have them being part of the sales cycle, which they are doing both. But I think a big piece for me was allowing Sophia and Maud and other people to genuinely do what they do, educate and help and assist, and then all work with other people to figure out how to utilize that information as part of a return on investment and marketing. So,
Hunter, that goes into your explorer value that you wrote for yourself like 7 weeks ago now.
yeah.
Well, anybody else? Don't feel pressured to either.
I also want to recommend, and I'm so sorry, Rachel.
That's okay.
If you haven't already, please put your view onto grid view, because then we can have a more kind of, we get to see everybody's reactions and trying to recreate a classroom as best we can. So I do apologize. Rachel, what were you going to say?
Well, one of my core values is joy. So finding joy in moments and finding things that bring me joy. And obviously, I mean, travel is at the top of the list. Seeing friends is at the top of my list. So for me, it's been a really interesting time to navigate because I can't travel as much and I'm not seeing my friends. So it's finding those moments of joy inside my house, in my apartment, whether it be via a creative project or as simple as watching a new TV show, you know, really holding on to those moments and making them as joyful as possible.
That's fantastic.
Yeah. All of our vices and little areas of where we find our joy have been taken away.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's very true. Cool. Well, I'm going to dive into a little bit more detail into what we're going to be talking about and kind of working through as an activity. But before that, I'm going to dive a little bit more into values. And I think there's a few people here that were on our first call, and we did defining our values, which was amazing and a really awesome call. And I can share with you all my worksheet of kind of a way to work through that and brainstorm and define values. I'm going to figure this out real quick. And so we're kind of taking a step after that definition phase, or that like idea of like this word that is your value, and taking it deeper into what that definition is and what behaviors there are. So I think sometimes values get a bad rap. People are like, great, this girl's going to talk about values again. Awesome. Like roll their eyes and walk away. And it gets a bad rap because so often it's a motivational poster sort of idea. And like values are more than this. It's not just a poster in your office or when you start a new job and some companies like, here's our values. And you just see a list of like teamwork, enthusiasm, integrity. And you're like, okay,
Cool.
what else? Like, what else is this? What else does this mean to you? And then also this becomes a problem in leadership when somebody's like, you're not leaning on our value of teamwork. But as an employee, you might be like, I don't know what teamwork means to you, because in my vision, I am working as a team, but in your vision, I'm not. And so we're going to kind of talk through making clear definitions for that, and then really defining behaviors that can keep you on track and like set expectations for that. So defining your values, and this is my values for WildLink, so you don't feel like you have to read through them all, but this is kind of the idea of like, you can choose your word, but you have to define it for yourself. And if one of your values is integrity or candor, like you can't just go to the dictionary and describe it via whatever dictionary says. Like take it a step deeper. Like, what does this really mean to you? Like, how am I acting on this in my daily life? And how am I leaning on this value as a leader as well? And so once again, I have some steps and tools on how you guys can do that for yourself that I'll share with you, because I don't want to spend our time working on definitions today. I want to look more of like behaviors and conflict. But we are going to work through our exercise kind of based off the root of these values, plus some of the ones that you guys have if you want to share them. So really encourage you to take a step back within your values and be like, what does this really mean to me? And write out clearly what that definition is. And then on top of that, actually building operations off of your values. And I think this is one of the areas where things get missed and where values become like kind of seen as a bad thing within companies. And via research from Brene Brown, which if you guys need leadership books to read, like highly recommend Brene Brown for everything, but if you haven't read it yet. But through her research, she's found that only 10% of organizations actually operationalize their values into a way that can be observed behaviors and teachable behaviors that can actually hold your team accountable. And so that's one of those big things. It's like, okay, so you have the value of integrity, but how are you holding your team accountable on that? What behaviors do you want them to be exuding to actually live within that? What is the expectation of the team, like team on integrity? And clearly setting that and educating your team on that. So then when we come to this next phase of like conflict, we can lean into it and you all have a common language around that behavior and that value. Does anybody have any questions with that? Does it kind of make sense?
Makes sense.
Cool.
I always think, I'm just kind of thinking about, maybe you can offer kind of two opposing, or maybe we're going to get to that a little bit later, but two scenarios where, one you may say, hey, here's our value is integrity, and then not following it. And then like a little bit more concrete for my brain, maybe.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's a big piece, and we will get into that in the activity a little bit of, you can identify all the behaviors that you want that can live within a value, but what is it that's pulling you away from them? Like, what is that slippery slope? What's like something that you find yourself in when you're irritated, that you're like not going to live in your value of like, my value is joy, Rachel, but you're like irritated with somebody and you're not finding any joy in anything of communicating with that person and you're frustrated. Mm-hmm. And so how do you lean on your value of joy in that really irritating moment while identifying what some of your slippery behaviors are of just mm-hmm. being like, I'm not going to find joy in this. I'm going to tell you what I'm mad about and walk away. Like that sort of behavior that's like the slippery slope.
Right.
Not saying that you do that, but common.
Sometimes I do actually.
Yeah, me too. So it's just like identifying what that is and what is not aligning with what feels good, and like approaching, the whole idea of this is like approaching conflict from the root of your values and identifying behaviors that you can lean on to hold yourself accountable, and then being able to identify those behaviors that you can lead from that lens, but also educate your team from that lens so everybody has this common footing, common language, and common expectation. And as leaders, that is extremely important, because if you have a team member that's just like you're not communicating well with, you're like feel like you're in this circle and you're getting frustrated, they're getting frustrated, your values can be kind of your step back. It can allow you to like take a breath, check yourself, and then ask your team member to do the same, because they know what your values are. They've been educated on them. So how can they check themselves, take a step back, and then you guys can both approach the conversation or the conflict via the lens and like the rooting of your values. So we're going to kind of work through a few exercises just to think through that and what it actually means. I think it's really, I can tell you to define behaviors on conflicts and end it there, but it's like, let's take this a step deeper. And so what we're going to do, and Maud, I'll stop sharing my screen because you have a little bit of a whiteboard to share that we'll take notes on. What we're going to do is, if anybody has a conflict that they've recently had that they want to share, or one that comes up, or you can create one, we can create one too if nobody wants to share. And then we're going to look at it, and through the lens, we can use my values that are written here. And this was just to kind of get you out of your own, if you don't have clear definitions of your values, not getting stuck in that like cloud of what does this mean to me, and taking it through a different lens of like, okay, so if I were to work for a company and I was having this conflict, what value would I lean on, and what behavior would I use to lean into that and work through the conflict?
Almost as if you were an employee of Wild Links and then you ran into this conflict. The company values of Wild Links are these. How would you make sure you're living those company values through that conflict? Just want to give everybody a heads up. I'm going to disappear for a moment so I can type. And then my caveat is that I am a very creative speller. I don't know if some folks know this already, some people don't. So bear with me if it bothers you. I'm so open to being corrected. No big deal. But
creative speller, I like that.
Yeah, very, very
I am
creative.
too.
Excellent. So you'll be able to read what I'm writing. Excellent.
That's a great way to look at it.
I like it. Cool. So, and also feel free that if you have a value that you want to like bring into this conversation, don't feel like you'd have to just live within mine. I do want this to be an open conversation. But does anybody have a conflict that they've recently experienced or have found themselves in the past that would be a good example on ways that we can lean into different values to work through it?
And feel free to change the names to protect the innocent.
I think my biggest problem is so right now I am in conflict with one of my colleagues quite a bit. And at the beginning of all this, it was very heightened. And I would say I'm a pretty open-minded, flexible, easygoing person, but he just ignites something in me and I lose all sight of that. And I can't, it's like to the point where like blood is boiling and I don't have time to even realize that I'm heading down a slippery slope. So I guess if I am in a conversation with someone and I'm feeling very heated, what are the best ways, and I don't know if this is in relation to this, but to just take that time to reflect, to pause.
Yeah, I think that's a big piece, and understanding that you need that reflection time. What would be, so the behavior that you're wanting to lean into is kind of that like pause for a second.
Yeah, pause and then just be more receptive, because immediately when I'm in conflict with someone, especially this one person, I shut down. So I think something that would maybe support me in that scenario would be, I think one of my new values is just being able to be present. So maybe taking like a deep breath and realize my surroundings or something, or I don't know.
Yeah.
But
I think another big piece that you're talking to in that is that I always encourage, and one of the reasons that you should know your values and lean on your values is it is presence, and you know that for yourself you need to take a step back and take a deep breath, and reminding as you work with people that it's okay to communicate that and be like, I am leaning into my value of presence at the moment and I need to take a 5-minute break. Let's come back.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of one of the great tools of values is you have like something to lean on via communication in general. And that behavior that you're coming from presence is communication of your needs and understanding your needs in that moment. So that's one of the behaviors that you can check yourself in on when you're feeling that like slippery slope of pulling yourself into just like irritation and rage. But being like, okay, I'm feeling myself slip here. I can check myself and be like, I need to lean into presence. My behavior out of that can be, hey, I need 5.
Yeah.
And
I think that's valid.
Yeah. So
100%.
I'm kind of coming at this with a lens of let's say that you were you are a manager of, or a leader for maybe two folks who are in conflict, and you are an employee of Wildlinks, and these are your company values.
Mm-hmm.
I'm wondering, is that okay? So now we have the value of candor. Is that what we're going to lean into? And how do we set that up? What behaviors of candor would you coach your team through which you would coach your team to address this conflict?
I like that viewpoint. I think too, taking yourself out and how you would lead somebody else through, it's always so important.
Mm-hmm.
So what would be, so when thinking about behavior, so I heard taking a pause.
Mm-hmm.
Pause. And everyone else, please pipe in. This is a collaborative effort. If you have, experience with this, I'm sure everyone's had experience with conflict, interpersonal conflict. But
If you don't, tell me how not.
yeah, exactly. You're in charge from now on. But how you've coached folks, how you would specific behaviors that you would lean on.
And with that too, like leaning on, but if you're coaching, what you would expect your team to do. So you're a leader and you have somebody come to you and they're having a conflict with a team member and they're not feeling respected or heard or whatever the emotion is, and they're feeling boiled up and heated. And so what behavior would you encourage them to take to move forward based on the lens of a value?
Everything that we just went over.
Yeah. Yeah.
Take a deep breath, take a 5-minute pause, go for a walk, get some fresh air.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Because it's so easy to just, I think my thing is like, I have so much mind chatter when I'm in that moment that I just regurgitate everything that's in my mind. And that's not always helpful, right? Like I need to be better at that. It's like with this one colleague specifically, I really haven't had anything like this before. And so it's a relatively new thing for me. And he's gonna be my new boss. So it's something that I'm very aware about and I need to work on. And I've known him for 6 years. So and I've always considered him like my brother, which is why I think sometimes I can be that open and honest. But if it were me and I were in that scenario, I think that would be the best piece of advice. And that's what I have heard from, my CEO. And whenever I do run across this issue is, just give yourself time to think and decompress.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I wonder also if I was coaching a team that's experiencing this, I might lean on the, especially kind of hearing some of what you're experiencing, I might lean on the company value of elevate. I'm kind of just, as I'm utilizing Morgan's description, our teams and clients can continue to grow through sharing their knowledge and insight with others. And I wonder if that's another piece I'd say, hey, let's lean on elevate. Let's look, I'm obviously not in this situation. I'm just trying to think of how I would, if we were to take this situation and turn it into a kind of generic, general situation, how I might coach my team. Just a thought.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mona was just like thinking about elevate and uniqueness as well. And I think something that you said in regards to like you have a unique relationship, right?
Right.
And so how do you bring the value of like uniqueness into conflict and take it out of that normal lens and think of like no individual is the same, but I'm committed to listening is how I write uniqueness. And so how can you listen to them and maybe the behaviors ask questions?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally.
Because you want to understand why this unique situation, this unique communication that's failing is not working.
Mm-hmm.
Does anybody have anything else to add in of a behavior that they lean on out of some of these values, or a different value that you lean on for yourself?
for me, thinking about this problem that you're posing is having a better understanding of the participants. So I would really be curious. So it sounds like Rachel has a pretty good relationship with this person,
Right.
that she considers him like a brother. So I'm always trying to make it the best for people to understand one another. And I would try to ask probing questions to find out, is there a way that you do communicate or could communicate well with this person, as opposed to whatever the trigger is that's giving you that automatic response. So if
Right.
you have a proactive conversation with somebody and say, hey, for some reason we have a communication issue, could you email me your questions before we sit down and meet, or try to avoid those confrontation points by being proactive and prepared.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. Or just asking, like, what do you need in this moment right now from me? I think we always just miss each other's cues, and like what we need from one another, we just really don't see eye to eye in a lot of things. But he sometimes is like, this is the way I see it. And I then tell him this is the way I see it, and we just completely overlook it. So finding a middle ground would be very conducive.
Yeah, and that's something we'll dive into later in this series that I think will be interesting. Actually, I just got off of a training with another team on conflict personalities, and we'll dive into conflict personalities in this as well. I think it's week 3 that we'll kind of dive into conflict personalities, but it takes a look through like how people communicate and how to lean into what your communication style is, but understanding somebody else's, and then meeting in that middle ground of what your values are. Because you can all be different, but if you're on a team together, you're fighting for one specific goal, and that's the goal of the company objectives, right? And so how do you communicate in a way and lead from a viewpoint of your values, and actually use your company values as a launching point and a compass on how to have these really hard conversations?
Yeah.
So what are 3, so like thinking that through, I think we want to kind of move into the next piece that we want to consider, which is what are 3 behaviors that pull away from this value? So the values that we've identified that we're leaning on in this situation are candor, unique, and elevate. So really meeting that person where they are, asking probing questions, and being open with your communication as well. So what are some behaviors that would pull you away, that would be almost, I think Morgan does a really good job of explaining it, as the slippery slope? Morgan, if you want to jump in that a little bit.
Yeah, it's the behavior that you find yourself in. I think we all have behaviors that we want to check ourselves on, like when you're downward spiraling in a space of irritation and all of a sudden you react in a way and you see yourself, you're like, oh shit, shouldn't have done that. Like, what are those behaviors, so you can identify it in the moment? And I think another side of this is identifying the behaviors of who you're in conflict with that trigger you to continue your downward spiral. So that if you can identify what your behavior is of a downward spiral that's like getting you there, or your action while you're in your downward spiral, I guess is the way to say that, and identifying what's triggering you, what behavior is triggering you that's sinking you deeper. Because if you can identify those and kind of think through that, you can catch yourself before it's too far deep and you're hanging up on the person, not wanting to talk to them for hours or days.
I think that it's really natural for people to want to avoid conflict, and so a pattern that I've seen in myself is that when faced with something like what Rachel's talking about, I'll go one of two ways. The first is shutting down completely and just avoiding it and hoping it'll go away. Or if I'm pressed, I will vomit out a stream of brutal honesty that then is just not good for anyone.
Mm-hmm. And then if you were finding yourself in that, what value would you come back to kind of lean in and be like, that's not what we do here. This isn't how we live in our culture. And so what would you be like, okay, I can lean into this, take a breath and come back in? Right.
I think, taking a pause and communicating the need to take that pause, that I think that's a really great first step. But I also feel like, one thing I want to get better at is communicating the fact that there is a conflict. Because,
Mm-hmm.
sometimes you say, oh, I need to take a pause, and you go take a pause, and then that person, like, we can't expect for people to really read our minds, or like, especially as women too, like sometimes it's like, oh yes, emotional little woman, go walk it off and then come back and we'll just not maybe
That's valid. Yeah.
It is valid.
But just to communicate the fact that there is a conflict, and that there is something hanging in the air, and that there is something that needs to be cleared up.
Yeah. I think that's leaning for like this sense of putting a name to it, of leaning into candor. It's like, we're going to be sincere, but we're also going to be very clear with what's happening and honest and open about it.
Right. And in a way too, that doesn't cause the other person to then shut down, because it's a real minefield, isn't it? Like when you're
Yeah.
when you're unpacking
Mm-hmm.
conflict, it's people can get really defensive, we can get defensive, people might want to shut down. There are always underlying causes. So
Mm-hmm. And I think, oh, go ahead with somebody.
Oh, that was me. Carry on, Morgan. I was gonna add another bad behavior, or not bad behavior, a behavior that pulls me away from this value.
Like it. Good catch. I think one thing that I bring up values and like the deeper roots of it to accentuate a company culture is exactly what you're saying, Sophia. Like every personality that you work with, every person that you come in contact, everybody's had a different experience with conflict. Some love conflict and are like, yeah, let's dive in and figure this out. Others don't want to deal with it at all. And so when you can create expectations and a common ground of how, like, what is really valued to each person in the company, and that's why they're there, right? Like, you are creating a cohesive team as a leader, and you have values that everybody's working from to elevate towards this larger goal. And so when, as a team, if you can really operationalize those values in a way that anybody on your team can come in and be like, I understand that conflict's really challenging, but we're here on the same common path, the same common ground to meet this goal. So I'm going to lean into our values. And that's the beauty within a team, to have those written and defined, because in that moment, it takes it away from being attacking or feeling like you just don't like the person for who they are, because that in conflict usually is what it feels like. It's like, great, now this person just hates me because I cry, or whatever it is. Like, whatever that feeling is that you think that you're being, like, getting feedback or being attacked, like, it's not coming from a negative place, it's coming from a positive intent. And I think that's just another layer of having these values, it's like, this is coming from a positive intent to actually elevate us to something new and keep moving forward to this goal. So I'm going to lean on these roots that we've defined as a company to move through it. Is kind of the aspect of the conversation, and kind of leaning towards that. Which then takes away, Sophia, that really like triggering piece of conflict, which conflict is triggering for a lot of people. And I think it's just worth understanding that.
Yeah,
Absolutely. So one thing
I like that.
yeah. So like going into kind of behaviors that pull away from this value, I'm thinking about in this situation, and I think I'm appreciating the unique value, because I do think in conflict, it's very easy to forget that that people think differently than you. So I've definitely been in situations where I'm like, I don't understand why they're not understanding. And then remembering that everyone comes to it with a different, unique perspective, and maybe trying their very best. And so that creating that, I guess I would coach myself if I was in that situation to say, hey, remember that everyone is unique and is coming to it with a unique perspective.
Yeah. And also, just so you guys all know, I'm going to send you some follow-ups that you can kind of work through some of these definitions for yourself. And I highly recommend for each value that you have, like this can even be a great team exercise. It can sometimes be challenging, but it's worth it. Definitely if you're coming back to a constant conflict with somebody and you're just not getting to the other side, definitely like Rachel, for your example, like they're about to be your new leader. Right. And so how do you, like, maybe one step of that is being like, okay, here's a company value X. Here's our definition of it. If your company has written out values, if not, start
we
with.
do. After I read Dare to Lead, I said we need to put together.
Good. Yeah. And coming to these questions of like, let's go deeper for this value of X. What are 3 behaviors that really support it, that we can hold each other accountable in? And what are the behaviors that we see ourselves sliding away from this behavior? And what does it really look like as a team when we're all doing it? That gets people excited and on the same path, but also as a team, you've now defined what those expectations are. When I work with teams on this, we write the 3 behaviors and then work it into their performance reviews. And how are they living that value? And it's an expectation that it's actually part of their performance management. So how do you build it into a greater structure of the company that can set that clear expectation? So when you lean on it when you're in conflict, because you can have all your values written, you can have all your structure written, conflict's still going to happen. You can't just avoid it and walk away, and you're never gonna see it again. So kind of taking the moment to be like, what does this mean to you, and how do you work through it? Can be very helpful.
I like it. Yeah, I like it.
So Maud just time checked, and we have about 3 minutes left. I know we started a little bit late for all of our technical difficulties, but I'm happy to stay on the call and communicate. Keep going if people want to keep communicating through it. If you need to leave directly at 1, we have recorded this, so we'll send out the recording. We'll send out this spreadsheet of notes that Maud has been typing on, and the slides that I had. I'll also be sending you a link to kind of my process of how I work through values creation and definition with teams. And so you can have that baseline to maybe start a conversation with a few folks within your company. But does anybody have questions or anything to add into this? It's a big topic, and I think a lot of pieces that have come up will continue to flesh out the next 3 weeks of this series, and they'll kind of play and build on top of each other. So
One of the things I kept thinking about as you were going through this conversation was I like to prepare myself to talk to each person and think about their perspectives before I talk to them. And sometimes that really helps me to get myself in a place where I am open to communication. All right, I got some dogs to go deal with.
Yeah, I think that's a big piece, is kind of leans into Rachel, your piece of like taking the pause and deep breath. What does that look like? That could be taking 5 minutes to really prepare yourself, understand, like look from that fisheye lens of what's really happening, taking yourself out of your like narrow viewpoint, which is really easy to get into. And I say all this and it's still challenging to do sometimes. So like understand that even though I'm like, oh, this is the like greatest way to deal with this scenario, that's not always how it plays out. But catching yourself in the behaviors, you're like, that didn't work. How can I take a step back and look at this from a different perspective? And how can I prepare for the conversation? I think that's a big piece. Thanks, Hunter.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Does anybody else have anything to add or thoughts?
This is, I just want to say, Rachel, thank you so much for giving this one, because it's a exceptional one that everyone is very familiar with. So
Yeah.
it's a perfect conflict scenario to bring up. So
Oh, good.
say thank you for just really fitting into our plans.
Yeah. Well, when I saw what it was going to be on, I was like, yeah, I need to take this one. And I'll definitely be taking the future ones as well.
Good. Yeah, I think next week we're going to dive into the toolbox and how to like really collaborate with people, and these 6 tools that teach to kind of dive into collaboration. And then from there, we're going to talk about conflict personalities. Within like the psychological world, there's 5 different types of conflict personalities that we can all fall into, and we tend to fall into different layers of them, but we're going to work through those and how to identify where you're at, as well as identify how to work with others that might be completely on the different spectrum of your basic conflict personality and communication personality. Great. Which I think will lean on some of this as well.
Yeah.
So.
Well, thank you for today.
Yeah, thank you guys all for being here.
So you're going to send us an email with all of the added stuff. Okay.
Yep, I'll follow up with you guys. We'll edit the recording and get that to you guys as well. And yeah, we'll be back next week. And you will have an email response from when you register on Eventbrite, and we'll follow up with a link.
Awesome. It'll be great. Thank you, everyone, so much. I absolutely appreciate it. Thank you, Morgan and Hunter, and Alyssa, or Evan, excuse me, Sophia and Rachel. Thank you so much for jumping on. Absolutely appreciate it.
Bye.
Have a good day, you guys.
Yeah, you too.
Morgan.
Bye.
Thanks again, guys. Great job.
Thanks, Hunter.
I'm going to go. So the Dare to Lead book, just since it's just us, is that a good book for basically anybody, or beginner?
Oh, yeah.
You want to start with that?
It's an amazing book. I think everybody and anybody should read it. I think it's like, it's not just a manager's book. It's very much focused towards leading, of course, but takes it from a very like psychological social worker lens and touches on a lot of different behaviors and areas of thought.
Okay. We have a Caputo Group Audible library, so I'm going to add that for team members.
I put on the wish list for the Audible library another one that Morgan suggested. Maybe it was that one.
I think I probably told you to read Dare to Lead. There's another one. There's also, it might have been What Works.
It was the one that we got that we had based the 3 questions off of.
That was Brene Brown's Dare to Lead.
Oh, it's already, it's in the wish list, Hunter, in the Audibles.
Okay.
I will track that down. I don't see that wish list, but I'm on Amazon. So, all right, we're recording this part of the questions.
So we'll edit it.
We'll have to have that one edited.